month and a half ago, I got hit by a truck here in Tokyo. It sucked, and it's been a surprisingly long process, so here's what happened, in the hopes that maybe you can learn something from it, but that with any luck, you'll never actually need any of this information. My external injuries are actually healing quite nicely, by the way. Not too bad. You can't see the bone anymore. That's a positive. The internals still have some time to go. First, and very importantly, I want to start by saying that things could have gone much, much worse. I was fortunate enough to walk away with one night in a moderately questionable hospital and only a single fully broken bone. But although that bone is a very small bone that broke, its impact is unfortunately large. Like, for example, I may never play the tsugaru shamisen again. 10 years of building a life here in Japan around that instrument now. So it was night, it was dark, I was coming home from setting up the studio here in Akihabara and heading home. I live near Tokyo Tower, so it's really only about 20 minutes away by bicycle or by electric scooter, and that night I was using this here electric scooter. Now, in all fairness, this particular bike is actually fairly well lit, especially at night. In Japan, any self-propelled motorized vehicle like this actually needs to be registered as an under 50cc vehicle, hence the license plate and the little Tokyo Tower down there, and it needs to follow all the normal rules like brake lights as well as mirrors and turn signals. Also, for the record, this is not sponsored. I don't even think you can buy this brand outside of Japan, but it does an amazing job at lighting up the road at night, which is one of the reasons I originally felt safe with it. But based on Japanese genski or under 50cc law, you cannot use the sidewalk. You have to use the leftmost 1 meter of the roadway to ride these. I am right around the area of the Imperial Palace, well within my 1 meter, and I remember hearing the sound of a truck coming up from behind me. Next thing I know, it hits me. I am flying through the air. I hit the ground. And I remember a taxi who must have been right behind the truck swerving to avoid me, and me thinking, I just need to stand up right now and be as visible as possible. Now, luckily, I tend to wear both a reflective vest and have a reflective strap on my bag. I definitely recommend it. Also, just a little tiny blood and gore warning on this one. Nothing heavy, but the warning is there in case you're squeamish. I at first did not think that the truck driver was gonna stop. It looked like he was just gonna keep going. And as my head was slowly exploding and I'm trying to wrap my mind around that and what would happen next, he came to a stop, thankfully. He jumped out of the truck, he came running up, he took responsibility, he was super apologetic, and he called an ambulance. And at first I tried to stop him, was like, no, I don't need an ambulance. You see, to me it looked like I just had a bit of a scratched elbow. Yeah, it might have been dripping a little bit, but it didn't seem that bad. You see, the injuries I had hadn't quite set in at that point, but over the next couple of minutes, I would most certainly slowly become very aware that it was more than just a scratched elbow. This was just the beginning. The truck itself was one of those like Powerline trucks, one of the ones that had the big buckets on top. I do want to say that the driver of the vehicle was both very kind and very stressed. It definitely didn't come off as intentional, and I didn't want to add to the obvious multitude of fears and stresses that he was most certainly experiencing at that point. So I just chatted with him and tried to keep things light and reassuring until the police arrived. And oh boy, did the police arrive. Like, if you have ever had an accident or been in some kind of incident or even seen an incident in Japan, you will know that police officers arrive in droves. At first, it started off with 2 officers on bicycles, then a few more officers, then a few more, then a few in cars. I don't even know how many arrived at the end, but every single officer or set of officers had to take a look at my driver's license, copy down my name and address and phone number, ask me about my work. Sometime after that is when the ambulance arrived. And it was around this point, when the ambulance arrived, that I slowly had started to realize just how bad things were. So in addition to the very obvious elbow injury, I had also come to realize that I was missing both clothing and skin from the entire right side of my body. And by this point, I'd also realized that I had completely snapped my pinky finger. I just couldn't move it, and little by little, the pain was also starting to set in. And then the friendly officer came. Oh, what a great guy. Now, a lot has happened and I've learned so many things since this accident, so in the grand scheme, this one officer was just a drop in the bucket, but there's always that one person, and I'll share that with you right after I give some love to this week's sponsor. This next section is a paid advertisement for NordVPN. You probably know NordVPN, you might even be using them, but if you're new to VPNs and what they do, the simplest explanation is that they can make your computer, tablet, device, whatever, look like it is accessing the internet from another country or location. This can be particularly useful, for example, in accessing streaming content on your favorite platforms from other countries. I personally use it for two main things in particular. Number one is anytime that I am using public Wi-Fi in order to keep my data safe and everything encrypted, because without the encryption of the VPN, using public Wi-Fi is essentially like being out in the Wild West. And number two, remember travel? That thing that we used to do a lot of and slowly seems like it's starting to come back? Well, more often than not, using a VPN to look like you are booking from within the country that you were hoping to travel to can likely yield cheaper flights and hotels and all of that stuff. I keep NordVPN on all of my devices, and if you want to give it a shot, you can use my unique URL in the description box down below with the code TokyoLens to support the channel and get yourself a 2-year plan with a huge discount, as well as 4 extra months for free. NordVPN also has a 30-day money-back guarantee, so it's completely risk-free. I highly recommend that you check it out. That is the end of this sponsored segment, and on to the story of this officer. So I'm in the ambulance at this point. We've done initial care, decided what hospital we're gonna go to, and all of a sudden this officer that I've never seen before pokes his head in from the side, looks me right in the eyes and says, "By the way, do you have a visa?" I'm just thinking, here we go. And I said, "I have Eijuken, which is permanent residency." And he instantly snaps back with, "Are you carrying your passport?" Now, I know that this may not have been the best approach, but it was late. I was incredibly tired and everything that had just... I looked at him and I said, "Are you carrying your passport? Who carries their passport?" Snaps back almost immediately saying, "You know, it's illegal for you not to be carrying some form of ID." And I said, "Well, you know, I have already given my license and other forms of ID to every single officer there. Why don't you go confirm with one of them?" He said, "I want to see your ID on my own." I handed him my license, he disappeared for a bit. He came back with my ID and with a brand new line of questions, which almost seemed like they were there for the sole purpose of seeing if he could trigger me or push me into getting upset. And it was at this moment that the ambulance drivers turned to him and said, "Sorry, that is enough. We need to take him to the hospital now. If you have any more questions, this is the hospital we'll be at." And they just closed the door on him, looked at me, and gave me a little smirk. Huge props and love to those ambulance drivers. You guys are amazing. You'll probably never see this, but I just want you to know that I appreciate the heck out of that. Wow. Now, for some extra fun, I had the good fortune of them bringing me out to a training or university hospital, which means I was the training subject for a young budding doctor, which I don't mind, but keeping in mind this was really late. It was definitely past midnight, maybe closer to 1 or 2 in the morning, and when you have a traffic accident, this may be the same in other countries, but they run an exhaustive number of tests. They do this like full body all over pressure. It's very uncomfortable as a test, and I had more x-rays in that one single night than I have ever had or may ever have in my entire life combined, to the point where I actually stopped them partway through and asked them if there was something wrong with the x-ray machine. My hip alone, the number of different angles and x-rays they took of, but that wasn't even the most shocking part. Now, it is an ER and this may be standard practice. I'm not used to ERs, but when they went to wrap up my arm, no cleaning, no ointment, no cover of any sort. They just wrapped it in gauze the way it was. And I remember thinking, well, they probably should have cleaned that, and this is gonna hurt when it comes off. And spoiler alert, it did hurt when it came off. And then after that, I was sent off to do the payment. And most healthcare in Japan is covered by insurance to a certain level, but because it's going to be the insurance company of, you know, the driver or his company or whatever, I had to pay everything up front and then they pay me back. I was in that hospital for hours. I don't know how many tests were run, and for American viewers, this may sound like a small number, but for me here in Japan, where you can go and get an x-ray and a CT scan and everything and walk out with like a 20 $20 some odd bill. When they gave me a bill for nearly $1,000, I was like, also, I'm from Canada, where healthcare is free, and also because healthcare is free, you would avoid going to an emergency room at all costs because they're always crowded and it takes them forever to get to you. But on the logistical side, they also gave me a CD that had all the x-rays and showed the breaks and all this, as well as an introduction letter to a nearby clinic where I would then start going on a near daily basis. Unfortunately, because this wasn't properly cleaned out at the ER, it got really bad for a while and the bandages had to be changed out like twice a day. And although my injuries seem really minor on the surface, like a broken pinky, smashed up elbow, and some road rash, it turns out they were gonna have a much bigger impact on my overall life for the foreseeable future than I ever could have imagined. And as I was starting to process and understand and learn about that, the insurance company started calling. On top of the obvious figuring out what the payment and the settlement and all of that's going to be, the other thing that the insurance company needs to do is figure out, I guess what would be called kind of division of fault, is what we might call it in English. It is basically a breakdown of what percentage of fault falls on each of the parties. And in a situation like this where someone's hit from behind, it's usually the person who did the hitting that bears the fault. But that actually reminds me, the day after the accident, I went down to the police station and spent a very large portion of the day with the police officers. We jumped in a police van, I guess, went down to the scene of the accident. They laid out cones, they got pictures, they went to all the different little spots. We basically laid out a step-by-step of exactly what happened in the accident while things were still fresh in my head, then went back to the police station, drew it all out on a map, wrote a full statement. I had to sign that statement. I didn't get to keep any of it. But in the process of doing that and having all the back and forth with the insurance companies, it all started to become very busy and overwhelming, and a friend recommended to me to look into getting a lawyer, telling me that if I get a good lawyer, more often than not, they'll only take a small fee if they manage to increase the settlement. So at the end, there's no minus to me. I did some research and saw that actually, as a non-native speaker, having somebody to represent me in a situation like this might not actually be the worst thing ever. And so I brought on a lawyer, but the entire process basically starts now and looks like it could go for as long as the next year or even more, until everything's decided and we know how long it's going to take for the injuries to heal. And really the injuries are the sad part, because okay, if you take a look at this side of the studio here, this entire side of the studio is built for shamisen. If you don't know what shamisen is a 3-stringed Japanese instrument. It is this right here, and it sounds absolutely awesome. Let me move that there. When I came to Japan, I had one really big dream, and it was to learn shamisen, become apprentice of two big players called the Yoshida brothers. And for the last decade, I've been learning directly under the older of the two Yoshida brothers. In fact, the three of us have even played together on TV. I have made shamisen plushies, my own shamisen plushies. And I've built this entire section of my studio around shamisen. And unfortunately, when you play, you need to put a bachi right in here and hold it like this. The way you hold the bachi is very important, and as you're striking the shamisen, which happens repeatedly, fast, and very hard, the risk of it re-breaking my finger, as that is the exact spot that my finger is broken, is incredibly high. And the doctors have told me that realistically, if I don't want to risk breaking my finger again, I might not ever be playing shamisen again, which obviously is a bit of a shock to hear. On one hand, I definitely don't want to give up hope, but on the other hand, if it's broken, there's one more kind of issue that I suffer, which is if I don't have full range of my hand, the next big step, the next big goal in my life, which was to get my pilot's license to do flight training, I won't be able to do that either, as not having full range of my hand invalidates my pilot medical. And so since this happened, I haven't actually been able to go back to Kagoshima and do any flight training because I've been doing rehabilitation and trying to, it's getting better. It's almost like I can actually open and close my hand now, which is something that 2 weeks ago I could not do. Also, shameless plug, the shamisen plushies are soft and wonderful, and once they're fully sold out, they will not be made again. They'll be linked in the description box below, and they're one of my favorite things that I have ever made. Let's be shamisen buddies. I have been understandably cautious on the road ever since the accident as well. I cycled to the studio and back pretty much every single day, but still get really nervous anytime a vehicle, especially a large vehicle, passes me. But I have not touched that kickboard, scooter, whatever you want to call it, since the accident, which is unfortunate because I have 2 years of prepaid insurance on that thing, and I'm pretty sure that I'm not going to use it anymore, but that may be for the best. And I genuinely hope that you never need to use any of the information that's in this video, but hopefully the entire process is there, at least my process. And if anything does happen and you need to hire a lawyer or something, there are plenty of English speaking lawyers. Just make sure that you get one that has the system that if they don't win a higher settlement, then you don't get charged for that, because then there's no additional risk for you and there's somebody to represent you and take care of all that difficult paperwork and everything. And there are lots of good lawyers in English in Japan. I would consider putting them in the video, but you might be looking at this 3, 4, 5 years. It'd probably just be better to Google them. I recommend just Googling lawyers in English. I think though, well, that is lower than I thought. And that should be pretty much everything. If I miss anything, please let me know in the comments down below. I'll do my best to give the answers that I can. Who knows, there might be people down there who know even more than me, so feel free to drop it in if you know something that I don't, as well as what's up, Crow? As well as I am looking forward to the comments on this one anyway. There's gonna be at least one guy in here who's like, you get your bones broken by a truck, dude. A truck never would have broken my bones. So we're gonna be having a festival down in the comments. I will see you guys down there. Thank you. So, oh, by the way, I did a camping video up on this rooftop a few weeks ago. So if you wanna see some urban camping, check that out. I was all wrapped up in that video, but thank you guys so much for being here. And I will see you again real soon.